Ugly scenes this afternoon in Canberra as the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader were rushed out of a building near the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. A protest had surrounded the building, quite a significant number of protesters who were there marking the 40th anniversary of the Tent Embassy noted that the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader were right next door in that building. And Tony Abbott earlier in the day had made some remarks that hadn't gone down well at all about being time for the Tent Embassy to move on. As you can see, the Opposition Leader and the Prime Minister were rushed out. Julia Gillard stumbled at one point, but under heavy guard, both made it to their respective cars. There were some scuffles between the protesters and police following the departure of the two leaders and some angry exchanges. To have a look more at the protest and indeed the 40th anniversary of the Tent Embassy, man, you can see there on your screen right now Michael Anderson. He is one of in fact, the only surviving founder of the Tent Embassy. 4 men founded the embassy 40 years ago, and Michael Anderson, you were one of them and you were there. I'll get to that time and what the Tent Embassy means and why we still need it. But first on this protest we've seen this afternoon, do you condemn in any way the actions of those involved?
No, I don't. Quite honestly, I condemn Tony Abbott for what he'd said. It's tantamount to inciting a riot. Like, you had a peaceful protest over there, people commemorating, what we consider a major milestone in our political history that really changed the face of Aboriginal politics in this country. And unfortunately, we had a goose called Tony Abbott sort of make some ridiculous statement that was only aimed at inciting a people, as far as I was concerned.
His words were, and he talked about the importance of the apology, of constitutional recognition, but then he talked about it being time to move on as far as the Tent Embassy is concerned. Why is that so offensive? It's
offensive because the thing is that nothing has changed. Things have got worse. Look what they've done in the Northern Territory, under the Northern Territory, intervention. That's not human rights, and they're suspending racial discrimination laws in this country in order to be able to achieve those things. This is a dictatorship that's been ruling Aboriginal people now. If you have a look at the Aboriginal estate, as they call it, or the Indigenous estate, the Aborigines don't own that. The Minister owns all that. The Parliament of Australia owns it. Aboriginal people don't own it.
But the scenes of physical intimidation that we saw there of elected leaders, Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, is there any place for that in Australia?
There's only a place in there when they incite it. The thing is that people have to get their points across, and you've got a bloke called Tony Abbott who shoots from the hip like he does. He's renowned for this, and a lot of people totally dislike him for that. And if he ever hoped he could ever become Prime Minister, I think that they might demonstrate that this is a man who could cause a lot of harm to this country.
But it also meant the Prime Minister, who hadn't made any similar remarks, faced intimidation as well.
I would have thought that the Prime Minister would have come out there in a diplomatic fashion and made her position very well known to an excited people.
You think she should have come out and said something, distanced herself from Tony Abbott?
Absolutely. The people went after Tony Abbott. They didn't go after Julia Gillard. And as you see from that scene there, Tony Abbott was actually walking behind her. He was pushing her to the front and he was walking behind her. That coward little man should never be allowed to do that.
So you make no criticism of the actions of the protesters involved?
We wanted them to come. When people were after them, and when I look at those, if you were there, well, I was there. I was right at the door where they came out. And what I found was that the police overreacted. The police panicked. Yeah, because I think they saw it as a siege mentality, and they got a bit scared for her safety. Well, understandably, that's understandable. You can understand. That's their job. But I think all they had to do was, just let her walk out, just walk out peacefully, not rush her out. They didn't have to do that.
Is it disappointing, though, that this is really another reminder of just how deeply divisive this day remains, Australia Day remains for so many people, so many Indigenous people in particular?
Absolutely. There's a move on now for a national unity movement. The National Indigenous Congress is now under attack by Aboriginal people around this country. Aboriginal people are condemning that constitutional document. They don't want to be a part of it. And we had talks with NIC yesterday.
Well, a lot of them do want to be a part of it.
No, there's only a handful. We're now calling on documents to show us who went to those consultation meetings and how many people went to those consultation meetings. You know, you've got a $29 million organisation funded by the federal government to set up a national Aboriginal Congress, Indigenous Congress, to advise the government on it. They have a lousy 3,000 members and only 400 people voted. That's less than 1% of the population of Aboriginal people in this country.
Let me take you back 40 years ago to the establishment of the Tent Embassy. You were one of the 4 people who set it up, and I understand it was with a beach umbrella initially.
Yes, it was, actually.
What was your aim at that point? Did you think it would be a site, a symbol that would still be there 40 years on?
Well, that's one of the great puzzles. It still puzzles me to this day. My colleagues who didn't volunteer to come down, they thought we'd be there probably for about an hour or something like that, and we'd be pinched, we'd be thrown in jail, and we might get about an hour's coverage of newspaper, page 6 or something of some newspapers, but it didn't pan out that way. But when we came down there, again, it was another Prime Minister, Billy McMahon, of the same sort of calibre as this fella, Abbott. And he says, we're going to lease land to Aborigines. Now, that's just madness, And so we then came down, we decided, well, this is our land, for heaven's sake, and we're going to come down here and we're going to make a point. And unfortunately, when we got down here, the old squatters' rights still existed, so... And
you stayed for how long initially?
We were there for 20 days, 6 days off 6 months. And then they introduced an ordinance to make it illegal to camp on the lawns. And that's when they came in and busted us.
Well, over the years, there were a number of attempts to shut the place down, to shut down the embassy and move it on. It was regarded a pretty ugly blight on the parliamentary precinct. Why do you think it's been able to survive so long?
Well, I think that there is an issue of sovereignty. And
on that site.
On that site, and now it's starting. We are going to roll this out around this country now, and so when we begin to assert our sovereign rights in this country, the Constitution will have no effect on it. There is no acquiescence on our part in terms of the Constitution because they're going to ask the majority of Australia. We probably represent 1.5 to 2% of the population, and they're going to be asking. 98% of the population, non-Aboriginal people, to include us in the Constitution. Now, why would you want to do that? We should be automatically considered that.
My understanding is, though, there have been offers over the years to set up an embassy in a building in Canberra somewhere, relocate to a more formal site. But why does it need to be in such a simple series of tents right there out the front of Old Parliament House?
One of the great symbolism that represents is the deplorable conditions that our people are living under out in those communities. We want to make those changes. We had a brilliant program commenced under Whitlam and Fraser. And, those two men really were honourable men. And they did a lot of wonderful things to try and bring about Aboriginal people becoming self-determining and self-managing. They established programs. I was involved in the departments at that time planning these programs. And we started rolling out very good projects around the country. Bob Hawke came in and the wheels fell off. This whole process, and if you look at it, it just started rewinding and undoing all of that good things that we were doing.
And can I ask you, Michael, to reflect on the nature of Indigenous activism back then, 40 years ago, and today? There are a number of Indigenous leaders who do take a far more pragmatic approach, it seems, when it comes to issues of working with the government, working with development. In Cape York, Noel Pearson, for example. Has there been a shift in Indigenous activism?
There is. There's a lot of what we call middle-class Aborigines now who've become educated and want to toe the line. Look, I've been involved since 1970s in government administration, government planning, development departmental goals and objectives, as well as negotiating for funds to roll programs out for self-governing programs. We commenced very good programs. Unfortunately, people were not trained sufficiently enough in those communities. They did not make arrangements to train people. That was one of the great flaws of that period, that they didn't train people to administer those programs. And unfortunately, some of the projects failed. But, what we got to understand is that a majority of those people were not educated. They had no idea of what they were doing, and unfortunately there was a lot of rip-offs at that period as well. It was open slather, but the thing is you couldn't penalise the programs because the programs is what the people wanted. We should have just fixed it up, jailed the people who caused those problems. That's what I say. The government failed to do that.
Michael Anderson, founder of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, thank you for talking to us.
You're welcome, thank you.